The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the refugee shelter, each drop a reminder of the war that had ravaged Kepler 442b. Sergeant Darren Cole sat in the corner, his prosthetic arm gleaming dully in the flickering fluorescent light. The scars on his face told stories he refused to speak aloud, stories of betrayal, of fallen brothers, of the day the Velkari ambush had cost him everything. He hated them, all of them. Every scaled, chittering, multi-limbed species that had dragged humanity into their endless territorial disputes. The Galactic Council had promised protection, promised partnership. Instead, they'd sent human soldiers to die in wars that weren't theirs to fight. Sergeant Cole, a trembling voice broke through his bitter thoughts. Darren looked up to see a young aid worker barely out of training, clutching a datapad against her chest. Behind her, partially hidden by her legs, were 3 small figures. His jaw tightened. "We have a situation," the worker continued, her voice uncertain. "These hatchlings were found in the wreckage of transport vessel 447. They're orphans. Every other shelter is full and—" "No." Darren's voice was ice. "Find somewhere else." "There is nowhere else, Sergeant. The storm has grounded all transports. It's just for tonight." She paused, lowering her voice. "They're children." Darren's good hand clenched into a fist. Children, the word tasted like ash. The Velkari who'd killed his squad had probably had children too. He wanted to refuse again, to send them away into the storm. But something in the aid worker's desperate eyes made him look, really look, at the 3 small beings. They were Velkari hatchlings, no more than a meter tall, their scales dulled by malnutrition and fear, the smallest 2 huddled together, their eyes wide and luminescent in the dim light. But the eldest, the one the aid worker's datapad identified as Severa, stood slightly apart, her small frame trying desperately to appear brave. "One night," Darren growled, "they stay on that side of the room. They don't talk to me. They don't look at me." The aid worker nodded gratefully and ushered the hatchlings inside before disappearing into the storm. Silence filled the shelter, broken only by rain and distant thunder. Darren returned to his corner, deliberately turning his back on his unwanted guests. Minutes stretched into hours. He tried to sleep, but old instincts kept him alert. He heard every small movement, every whispered word in their clicking language. Then he heard something else. Crying. Soft, muffled, but unmistakable. Darren squeezed his eyes shut. Not his problem. Not his responsibility. But the sound continued. A keening whimper that wormed its way past his defenses. With a curse, he turned around. The 2 smaller hatchlings were huddled together, shaking. Severa crouched beside them, trying to comfort them with gentle chirps and touches, but she was trembling too. As Darren watched, a piece of the ceiling gave way, dripping cold water directly onto their makeshift bedding. "Damn it," he muttered. He stood, grabbed his emergency blanket, and crossed the room. The hatchlings froze, eyes wide with terror. Severa immediately positioned herself between Darren and her siblings, spreading her small arms in a protective gesture that was both pathetic and heartbreaking. "Relax," Darren said gruffly, tossing the blanket toward them. "Your bedding's wet. Use this." Severa caught the blanket, confusion evident in her expression. She clicked something in her language, then tried human words. "Why, help?" "Because I'm not a monster," Darren snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. He took a breath. "Just take the blanket." He returned to his corner, but sleep remained elusive. He found himself watching the hatchlings as they huddled under the thermal blanket. Severa had wrapped her siblings in most of it, leaving herself partially exposed. She was still shaking. Darren's mind drifted unbidden to his own sister, younger by 3 years. She'd always been the brave one, always protecting him from their father's anger even when she should have run. She'd died in the first Velkari raid on Earth's outer colonies. He'd carried that rage for 5 years. "Your name is Severa?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the darkness. The eldest hatchling's head snapped up, surprise evident. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Sergeant. How old are you?" 7 cycles. She paused, calculating. 4 of your years, 4 years old. Darren felt something crack in his chest. "And them?" "Takin and Morale." 2 cycles, twins. "Where are your parents?" Severa's scales seemed to darken. "Ship attacked. They put us in escape pod. Said they would follow." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They did not follow." Darren closed his eyes. He knew that story. How many human parents had done the same? How many final acts of love in the face of inevitable death? I'm sorry, he said and meant it. Severa tilted her head, studying him with ancient eyes in a child's face. You lost family too. I smell the grief. Yeah, Darren's voice was rough. I lost a lot of people. To Velkari? Some of them. Severa looked down at her small claws. We are Velkari. You hate us, it wasn't a question. Darren wanted to say yes, wanted to hold on to that comfortable anger. But looking at these 3 orphaned children shivering under his blanket, he couldn't find the words. I hated what happened to my people, he said finally. I hated the war. I hated that I couldn't save everyone. He paused. But you're not soldiers. You're kids who got caught in the same nightmare. Severa was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something Darren never expected. She stood, carefully unwrapped herself from the blanket without disturbing her siblings, and walked across the room. She sat down a respectful distance from him. May I stay here? She asked. You feel safe. Darren stared at her, this small alien child who should have feared him, who had every reason to hate humans as much as he'd hated her kind. Instead, she'd chosen to trust him. Yeah, he said softly. You can stay. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. Severa's eyes began to droop, her small body swaying with exhaustion. Without thinking, Darren reached out with his good arm and steadied her. Thank you, Sergeant Cole, she mumbled, already half asleep. You are a good human. As she drifted off, leaning slightly against his side, Darren felt tears he hadn't shed in years burning behind his eyes. 5 years of rage, of grief, of hatred, and it took 3 orphaned hatchlings to remind him of a simple truth. The enemy wasn't a species. It was war itself, and the only way to win was to remember what they were all fighting for. Not vengeance, but the chance for children like Severa and her siblings to grow up in a universe without fear. When morning came and the aid worker returned, she found Sergeant Darren Cole sitting upright, his prosthetic arm carefully cradling 3 sleeping Velkari hatchlings, all wrapped in his emergency blanket. For the first time in 5 years, his face held something other than anger. It held hope.